Ladies and gentlemen, it is some strange days. We've got coronavirus sweeping the globe, and most people I know are sheltering at home. If your family is anything like mine, you've got kids. They're home with you. You've got no school and no activities, so it's all you, all the time. And that is not easy. But don't worry, I've come up with two awesome toys that your kids will love playing with. More importantly, they can come down in the shop and make these things with you. That way, you can spend some quality time with your kids, get them away from the TV, and get in a little shop time. Because, let's be honest about this, things are really serious. But should we give in to fear and just stop woodworking completely? Hey, get a grip on yourself. This is no time to panic. My daughter loves to play tic-tac-toe. And I'll tell you, we are using up a lot of paper at my house. So I think she can help me make a reusable tic-tac-toe game so we can stop wasting paper. And she can make it with me. You can do this whole project with scraps, so don't worry if you're low on wood. Here, I'm using my little Craig measuring jig and a pencil to lay out a little grid in the center of a scrap of cherry. I have plans for this project with all the measurements, but feel free to adapt this to whatever stock you have laying around. It can easily be bigger or smaller. I've got the jig set up as a square here, and I'm using my little Stockman knife to mark out my lines. This knife actually has 3 useful blades, and I've got a whole video on how you can use it for woodwork. With the knife lines laid out, I'm using a chisel to turn them into knife walls. This is a really useful technique for making a line that will guide tools as you move forward. After my knife walls are done, I use a back saw to deepen them further. For this video, I decided to use some of my vintage tools, just for a change of pace. But you can do this whole project with the Woodwork for Humans toolkit. Like, you could use a Dozuki saw for this step. After the saw, I come in with a triangular file to make my saw curve into an even groove. The tip of the file works just as well as the cutting faces on this soft cherry, and I'm getting a nice groove, which I can then finish off with a little scrap of sandpaper. With all these tools, you're going to get a few stray marks on the surface of your board. Don't worry, we'll take those off in just a minute. When my grooves are done, my daughter can get in and color them in with a marker. Kids of any age can help with this step, and it doesn't have to be perfectly neat. We'll tidy everything up in a second. My daughter is only 6, but she loves to drill with the brace and bit. Sometimes we come down into the shop and just drill scrap to kill time. So she's delighted to help with this step. She likes for me to hold the top of the brace while she cranks. It's not hard, and she gets to be a part of the process. You can see that I've got tape on the bit to keep us at a consistent depth. A ½ inch or so is plenty. When all the holes are drilled, I come in with a smoothing plane set for a fine cut. By planing off the top of the wood, I take off tool marks and excess marker all at once, and I get a clean surface with crisp black lines for my game. Now we just need to make the pegs. If you're cutting dowel by hand, a shooting board makes a great holder, and my daughter can do the sawing with a little guidance. I set her up with my smallest saw, and she feels like she's doing most of the work. She gets a little bored after sawing a few, but that's fine, since I have another job for her anyway. I need one end of each peg colored in after I saw it and sand the end a little. My daughter breaks out the markers again, and we get a little assembly line going. She does 5 in black and 5 in red, and our set is done. Now we have a reusable game that also works for travel. The pegs are a good size for little fingers, and I've made the holes a little oversized, so it's easy to play the game. And play it. And play it. And play it some more. But listen, even if you play this game 1,000 times, your kids are still gonna get bored with it eventually. So that's why I came up with this great double-barreled rubber band gun. And we're still gonna make this out of random scraps and household junk. We'll start with some dowel, something around 3/4 inch thick. If you don't have any, look around for an old broom handle, or take a square piece of stock and plane it into an octagon. That'll look cool too. I'm cutting 2 lengths here, about 10 inches long, and planing a narrow flat into each one. Then I can put a little glue on the flats and clamp them together. The glue doesn't take long to dry, but the ends are ragged. I've never tried to trim dowel on the shooting board before, but it works great, and I'm ready for the next step. I'm going to plane a small flat across both barrels and make a little stock that I can glue underneath them. I cut a thin piece of board and then plane a bevel on both long edges. You probably noticed this modern Stanley plane that I'm using throughout this video. It's interesting. I'll have a full review in a few weeks. I want that bevel across the front of my stock, but that's tough end grain in brittle red oak. With a small piece like this, the easiest thing to do is clamp the plane upside down in the vise and pull the stock across the blade at an angle. This is an especially heavy plane, so this technique makes a lot of sense. It also has an adjustable mouth, and I do close it up a bit for a cleaner cut. Now I'll need a grip, and for that I'm going back to my scrap of cherry. I'll use the handle from this dovetail saw to give me a comfortable shape, and it's pretty easy to rough out with a couple of saws. I don't love coping saws, but they're hard to beat if you're doing this kind of work by hand. I specifically picked cherry for the grip because it's such a close-grained and relatively soft wood. It's easy to shape with rasps and files, and you get a clean surface without all the splintering you get from oak or ash. If you ever get confused about which wood you should use for which project, I've got a whole video that explains wood characteristics and how to choose between the most common species. I'll put a link to it in the description. I've already got the stock glued underneath my barrels, and it's easy to add my grip. It's not even totally done, but I want the whole thing to dry overnight, and I can finish shaping it once the glue is dry. Now you might be thinking that my daughter hasn't been doing a whole bunch while I've been making this gun, but you'd be wrong. I've found all sorts of jobs for eager little hands in the shop. Some of the work I'm doing now is too hard for my daughter, but she still makes herself useful. Now, I need to make a platform for a pair of clothespins. These are going to be my trigger mechanism. I've built the angle I want into my grip, and I can just come in with my Ryoba saw and continue that angle across my barrels. Then I can plane the whole thing level. If your clothespins are like mine, you might find they grip the rubber band too tightly and don't let go. You'll need to just file away a little of the front jaw until the rubber band just slips out when you open the clothespin. Finally, we need little nibs for the rubber bands to grip at the tips of the barrel. I just chisel out some slots and then glue in some small pieces of hardwood that I can then saw off and trim flush with a chisel. The last step is to glue on my clothespin triggers. You only need a little bit of glue, but you may want to get creative with the clamping to get nice, even pressure. Don't clamp it very hard. These clothespins are pretty fragile. While the glue is drying, find a couple of good locations around the shop and set up a few targets. Okay, the completed gun is totally easy to load. Take your rubber band and put it back in your clothespin, just like this, and then bring it forward and loop it around that little nib at the end of the barrel. Then do that for the other one, and you're all loaded up and ready to go. So, how's the gun actually work? Well, not bad at all. And it was a lot of fun to make. My daughter didn't do a ton of this part, but just being in the shop, getting to spend time with me, that made her happy. And I think it is really useful to look at this whole crisis as an opportunity. Maybe we can spend a little more time with our loved ones. Maybe that time can actually be fun and interesting. I hope so. And I've tried to make stuff in this video that could help you spend a little more time with your kids. Now, both of the projects I made here are pretty simple, and you can probably just make them. But if you want plans, I've got a full set available. They're very inexpensive. You can click the link down in the description or find them at rexkruger.com/store. And this is always the part of my videos where I talk about my patrons, how they make all of this possible, how they pay for pretty much everything you see here. But this week, I've got an exciting announcement. I've recently built and installed a discourse discussion board into my Patreon service, which means all of my patrons now have a full-featured discussion board where they can share projects, ask questions, post pictures, and just communicate with people. We already have a fantastic community over there, but I'm doing my best to make it even better. If you'd like to see all the things that are going on, go over to patreon.com/rexkruger and check out the early access, rewards, and benefits that I have for the people who make this possible. And listen, this is usually the spot where I say thanks for watching, but I think there's something more important to say here. Take care of yourselves while all of this stuff is going on. Stay home if you can. Check in on your neighbors. Call your parents. I honestly believe we can get through this if we stick together. See you next time.